Aw, yeah. Welcome to the Women Inspired Podcast, brought to you by CareerKindling.com, a growing movement to help inspire, empower, and ignite women in their careers and in their lives. I'm your host, April Seifert. Each week, I get to interview some of the most inspiring women, and I'm bringing those interviews to you. Let's get to it. Welcome to this week's podcast. This week's guest is professionally known as Dr. Amy Hillard. She's a psychology professor at Adrian College, a small college in Southeast Michigan. She teaches classes like general psychology, social psychology, research methods, and psych of gender. Her research interests include prejudice and its reduction, with some research on everyday sexism and workplace issues for women. Non-professionally, she is known as Dr. Maims U. Maims, or Maimy for short. She's a roller derby skater on an internationally competitive team called the Ann Arbor Derby Dimes. Her team is currently ranked number 32 out of 400 plus leagues in the world. Amy began her roller derby career during her last year of graduate school and is currently competing in her 6th season. Amy, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me. Excited to talk with you a little bit today.
So I gave everybody a bit of a bio about you before we hopped on our call, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I'm from Wichita, Kansas originally. Right now I am a psychology professor at Adrian College, so let me tell you a little bit about how I got there. I went to a small liberal arts college named Hendrix College, and I really liked that sort of environment. And so when I went to pursue my PhD at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in social psychology, I really was still drawn towards teaching, although I really liked doing research, especially related to social issues. So I continued my education there. Eventually, I took a postdoc looking at issues for women in STEM, technology, engineering, math, right, science, these areas in which women tend to be more underrepresented. And so I was able to do a postdoc looking at those issues for a year before coming here to Adrian College. So that's how I came to be a social psychologist at a small liberal arts college.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about where you're at now, a little bit about your family and all of that.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of years ago, I married my college sweetheart and was lucky enough that he was able to, come with me at various points in my career to pursue my interests. We've been married for a couple of years. We live close to college in Adrian, and kind of like our place between, Toledo and Ann Arbor. We have a couple larger places nearby, but kind of liking our little small town and area.
So you've got this professional side to yourself where people see you as an academic person, as a professor, and somebody who does research, but you've also got this other side to yourself that sort of centers around this very unique hobby of yours. So tell us about that side of your life.
Sure. I play roller derby in my spare time.
Nice.
So roller derby sort of had this resurgence starting in the early 2000s, which I can tell you a little bit about. But it's a very exciting, women-driven sport. And so I've been playing for about 6 years. I actually started in my last year of graduate school and have been able to the nice thing is it's not only national but international. So there's people all over the world who play this sport. And so as I've kind of moved to different places for professional reasons, I've also been able to have this community of people that I have something in common with. I get to play this really fun sport with women of all ages, all backgrounds, and we get to work together in this really cool thing we all have in common.
So, Amy, tell me a little bit about how an average game goes, because I don't know a whole lot about roller derby at all.
Sure. So we generally call games bouts. That's the sort of name that we give the event. And so bouts are cut into two 30-minute halves. And those halves are further divided into what are called jams, which can last up to 2 minutes. They can be shorter than that, as I explain in a minute, but maximum 2 minutes. So each team puts out 4 blockers. So in total, there's 8 people out there, half of which are from each team that are in this position to try to prevent other people from scoring points on them. Each team puts out a jammer, and the jammer is the one that scores points, and they do that by passing the opposing blockers. So I'm a blocker, and what I'm trying to do is prevent the other jammer from passing me, but also to help my jammer pass other people. So that means I might go hit the other blockers out of the way so that she can get by. I might instead be focusing on trying to keep the other jammer behind me to prevent her from getting my points or my teammates' points. So you're sort of playing offense and defense at the same time. And so it's a very fast-paced game. That's why I think it takes a lot of attention and awareness of what's going on. And I said earlier that it can go up to 2 minutes. But the first pass through the pack, that's what the name of the 8 blockers who are mixed together. It's called the first pass through the pack. One of the jammers gets awarded lead. The first person through is the lead jammer, and she can call it off if she likes before the 2 minute mark. So, for example, if you were lead jammer and you have just gotten through the pack and the other person has not, you might be like, all right, I got the 4 other blockers' points, so I'll take those and we'll reset and call the jam early. And then we'll reset, next 2 minute jam starts.
So you said you've been playing for about 6 years. That's, quite the tenure in I don't know, what seems like a really crazy sport to me. But how did you get started with it?
Yeah, so I think when I was in graduate school at some point, we were like, oh, let's go check out this roller derby thing. And the first time I went to the bout, I was like, man, that was really fun and interesting, and I can't wait to see that again. So it took me back to, roller skating growing up, and I remember always being kind of resistant to the inline skates, and roller derbies played on quad speed skates, right? And so I wanted to go skating after watching, this crazy fun-looking sport. So what I ended up doing, actually, how I sort of got into it a little bit more, was I had gone home to visit some family, and I looked there to see if there was any roller derby happening while I was going to be there. And they did not have a bout, but they did say, hey, come to a practice, and you can come learn more. And so I did, and I ended up actually staying longer so I could go to a second practice the next week to kind of check it out and learn more about the basics of roller derby. Eventually, the local team ended up recruiting and sort of starting a new session and said, hey, if you're interested in roller derby, come and learn more. And so I think at the time, I was just like, well, we'll just see how this goes. I'm just interested, and I liked watching roller derby, so we'll try this. It looks like fun, and I like skating. So I think it just started small, going to a couple of practices and then just buying in more and more over time. So could you actually skate in the beginning when you started? Were you a good skater? Is this something you'd been doing for a while throughout your life? Not a lot. So we have people at all stages when they start roller derby. There are people who have never skated before who are what we'd call wall huggers. We have people who, played hockey or did other kinds of professional sort of skating. I remembered skating a lot growing up. I liked doing it. And actually, my husband and I, when we were in college, he used to play roller hockey. And so at some point, we'd go to the park and sort of skate around. And so I bought some, very cheap, basic skates just so we could go skating together at the park. And so I had been skating in my adult life occasionally, but it wasn't certainly the level of dedication seen in the sport. So, and when I started, I think I didn't think I was half bad. And looking back, I was like, yeah, I had a lot to learn. So I wasn't starting from the complete bottom, but I certainly wasn't much past proficient either. That makes sense. When you started, did you feel
it seems like one of those sports that could be a little bit intimidating to get into because there's this existing team of people who have probably been playing and skating together for a while, and probably people who are extremely good at it, and maybe some who aren't as good. But I find, at least for me, that when I'm starting something that is a little new and intimidating like that, I have this awful habit of looking at the people who are really, really good and thinking, oh my God, they're so much better than me. Did you have any of those feelings, and how did you deal with them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you look around and you're like, I don't know how to even start or how to get there, right? One of the things that really intimidated me when I started was the contact nature of the sport. So I wasn't sure how I was going to like that. And in the same way, I just sort of approached it like, well, we'll see how this goes. We'll give it a try and see what happens. So, but I do remember after sort of my first season, they had a new class of people who were interested in roller derby, and we were asked to kind of give some advice. And the advice that I gave, and I was like, it might seem kind of strange, and probably some other people might have raised an eyebrow for them, but I was like, it's okay to be scared, right? It's okay to not be sure about all of this. And I wasn't sure that I was going to like the contact. I was like, well, we'll try it and see what happens. Turns out, I really liked it. So, if you hadn't been willing to try, right, then, I would have never found that out. Right. And I think that extends to skill development that I'm still working on, right? You have to be willing to try and fail and learn from it in order to, keep improving and succeeding. And so part of that just suggests that it's not just about some sort of inherent skill, but that you're putting forth effort and risking, even getting it wrong in order to learn and improve.
That's really a great lesson for, I think, anything in our lives and in our careers. There's always going to be something risky that we want to try, but the reward is there. If we try and we can make it happen, there's a huge reward at the end, but it's having that set of guts to be able to take a difficult project or do something new that you just aren't completely sure how it's going to go. And that can be so difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and I think focusing on that idea of progress, not perfection, is useful there too, that you're focusing on how you're improving or the little steps that you're taking, because you don't necessarily notice that over time that accumulates into something much bigger. And so the little choices that you make, and for roller derby, right, whether or not I go to practice or how hard I'm pushing myself, those are little opportunities that you have to develop habits that sort of set you up for success later. And I think that that's true in career stuff as well.
I'd imagine too that it's a unique experience being on a team of women where maybe you have a great game, or maybe you make some mistakes during a game, or someone else does. How do you as a team handle it when somebody doesn't have their best game? Because I think there's two roads that this can go. Sometimes things get really competitive, even within a team, where you would hope there would be a level of support there. So sometimes things can get competitive and not supportive, or sometimes it makes it really easy when you have a team around you to be able to support you when you feel like you haven't done your best. What's been your experience in that vein?
Well, I think as a team sport, there's this aspect where you know that you can rely on the other people that you're working with. And so in some ways, for me, that takes some of the pressure off, and I'm not as focused on, maybe self-conscious is the right word rather than focused. I think it helps me focus on what I'm doing and not worry about my own stuff, because I know my teammates are there to help me and that I'm there to help them, right? And in fact, that we need to work together in order to get the best things to happen. So I think there's some aspect to which, for me, in my teammates, I'm trying to figure out what it is that they're really good at and how I can facilitate them doing those things. right? Because everybody has different strengths. And so how can I help you play to your strengths, and how can you help me do the thing that I'm good at, right? And we can both help each other in order for the end result to really be the best.
I'm going to go right into one and I really don't know a ton about roller derby, but I'm going to go right into one aspect of it. I'm used to seeing these videos of this, what looks like incredibly violent roller skating, and it looks really scary. Is it really like that, or is that just the way that it's portrayed on movies and on TV?
A mix. Sometimes it can be. In the 70s, roller derby was this sort of performance, right? In the same way we might think of professional wrestling today. A little bit fake, right? A lot of big elbows to the face, and, people's bodies flying through the air. So in its modern reincarnation, roller derby is played on a flat track. And that reincarnation really started with women out of Austin, Texas, who wanted to develop this into a sport. And so what's happened in this sort of modern version is that it is much more of a sport. There are penalties. I can't go around elbowing people in the face, right? I'll go to the penalty box for that sort of thing. And so we've really changed the rules to make it into a sport, but we still have some of the same nods at sort of roller derby's earlier history, like funny names or other aspects that are more showmanship versus sport. But overall, I think we're moving in a direction to try to be taken very seriously as a sport developed by women and for women.
So do you get hurt when you play?
Yes, luckily for me, knock on wood, mostly minor things, but everything from I fractured a finger, I have probably irreparably damaged my tailbone. I have, pulled muscles and minor things like that. I think part of the reason is people get really into roller derby as well. We don't really have much of an off season. And so unlike other sports where, here's where you go do other things and, fix all the muscle imbalances or rest the parts that need it. It's very easy in roller derby to not take that time. But sure, there's always a risk of injury. I certainly have known people who've had some pretty serious injuries. But from my perspective, I'm also I know two people who've broken their ankle stepping off of a bus, right? So stuff happens in roller derby and in regular life.
You mentioned a couple minutes ago that there's these nods to roller derby of old where, you come up with names for each other. How did you get your name?
So originally when I started, I was talking to a friend and we were going through different iterations of my first name, and we came up with Maimy. And so I started under the name Maimy, and my number was needle 8. Later, to make it easier for reps and things, they changed some of the numbers, the rules about numbers that you could use. And eventually, after I mentioned that I had transferred to different leagues, and after I got my PhD, had sort of joked with people about changing my name. So eventually I had to change my number anyway, so I adopted Dr. Maims U, and I'm still number 8, though.
Awesome. That's awesome.
I'm number 8-4. I had to take 8-4.
Got it. I imagine that being in this sport as an insider, there are some pieces to it that spectators and, people who, I haven't even been to a bout, but I've, casually seen video and stuff like that, things that we wouldn't realize about it. What are the parts about the sport that really energize you, that really keep you wanting to go back and wanting to continue to participate?
So some people have described it as trying to play chess while someone's throwing bricks at you. And I think that's fairly accurate. So when I first started, what I really liked was spending 2 hours just focusing on this very physical challenge. And that's something that, although I sort of dabbled in sports growing up, I wasn't really drawn to in the same way. In fact, I had a lot of friends, including you, in graduate school who were interested in a lot of sports that took a lot of persistence and time and energy, and I'm not sure I really understood that until I found one that was a good fit for me. Having that time where I was just focused on this physical challenge, where I couldn't really think about other concerns or issues, was really nice. So when I started, that sort of absorption and the activity was really rewarding, and I still enjoy that now. So it's sort of that this takes so much time and attention and focus to do what you're doing that you're really present and in the moment. Sometimes it's so much so that you forget like just what happened after you're skating off after a jam. We call it Jamnesia, right? You're so focused on what you're doing that everything else is sort of put out of your mind. So when I started, that was something I really needed in my life because it was sort of a stressful time being on the academic job market. But when I was there at practice, I couldn't think about those things. And that was a really nice sort of break from some of the other concerns that I had. But in addition, when I started, one of the things that was really rewarding as well was meeting all these people from different walks of life. So roller derby is an all ages sort of sport. I know grandmothers that skate. I know college students that skate, right? We've got a whole range of people. And so I think it brings together a lot of other people who I might not otherwise get to meet. And so that was another thing that when I started was really rewarding. For me now, one of the things that keeps me going is I'm on a very competitive team. And so we're constantly pushing ourselves and moving forward. We're lucky enough to be at sort of a competitive level where I think everybody is sort of lifting each other up, right? We're collectively all getting a lot better at roller derby while we're competing against each other. So I think that's really something that draws me now.
Having been in the sport for a handful of years now, I can imagine that it starts to bleed over into your normal life. And I can imagine that there are things that you've learned both about how to face challenges or maybe about yourself and how you conduct yourself in difficult situations or whatever it might be. What have you learned about yourself and about how to handle life from this sport?
I definitely figured out that you got to look for small victories and, having good awareness of where you are and what you're working towards and setting small goals, that is rewarding is something that I've learned. Sometimes I think we don't necessarily notice how much those small things sort of add up over time. And so I think that's something that is true, in roller derby, but also in my professional life, that I try to make small adjustments that are achievable. And, over time, those things build up to something more. For me, another aspect that's interesting is that I study stuff like objectification of women and, areas in which women are underrepresented, like sports. And so for me, it also is professionally interesting because it's taught me a lot about, how I view my body. And it's the first time I would say that I've seen myself as an athlete.
So, Amy, you just mentioned objectification of women, and that's something that I think we hear a lot about, but it's not something that a lot of us really think through in terms of what that might mean for us as individuals and how participating in a sport like this or participating in physical activities where you're asking your body to do something incredible, how that might change the way that we think about ourselves. So can you just talk a little bit more about what you were getting at with that?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned that I do a little bit of research related to gender issues, and objectification is one area. So if I was going to give you a definition, I would say that it's valuing, appearance-based things about your body more than performance-based things about your body. So seeing your body as an object rather than an instrument. And from a gender perspective, men and boys are definitely brought up to treat their bodies as instruments to achieve things. And women, not so much. We're seen more as things to be looked at, right? And that a lot of people's, even women's, sometimes fitness goals are focused more on appearance than what they can achieve with your body. And so sport is a really interesting thing for women because it gives you this opportunity to focus on what you can achieve with your body. And I think roller derby is an especially interesting case because there's no best body for roller derby. There are advantages and disadvantages to all different sorts of body types. And I think, I was mentioning that roller derby is really age inclusive. It also has a ton of body diversity. And so everyone's just trying to figure out how to use what they have in a way that, produces an advantage. So if you're big and strong, right, you're harder to move. You also can hit harder, right, whereas other people might be smaller and more agile, so they're harder to hit, right, so they can duck around if someone's projecting a big hit coming towards them, right? So there's all sorts of advantages and disadvantages to bodies, and everyone's just trying to figure out how to play in such a way that they can really capitalize on the advantages that they have in their body at that moment. And I think from that perspective, it's really powerful. So just generally, I think it's taught me about how to see my body as a means to accomplish things, right? When I work out or cross-train or just I'm at practice, I'm doing things to be better at roller derby. And I don't really, the ultimate goal is to translate that into better performance on the track. And so when I go lift weights, when I'm going to a metabolic conditioning class and doing a HIIT workout, right, all of those things, when I get to that moment where I want to quit, I remind myself I'm doing this so I can be better at what I love, right? And I think all of that tells you about sort of persistence, about viewing yourself as achieving something and how you work towards that, and just in sort of a gendered issue way, seeing your body as a means to conquer your environment and as something you can take advantage of to achieve things.
The point you made about using your body to achieve things versus focusing so much on what it looks like is so poignant. And it's something that I've noticed in my experience, my background in powerlifting. I can completely echo that same sentiment where it's incredible when you start to focus on what your body can do and you don't focus as much on what it looks like. You start to love your body in a different way than you're able to when all you're focusing on is its flaws and things that you have to fix. It's interesting when you're doing something like a sport or something physical like roller derby or powerlifting or really any kind of activity like that. It's a focus on more, not less. How can I do more? How can I build more? How can I be more? Not how can I be smaller and less. And you know what I'm saying? It focuses,
Absolutely.
Your attention in a way where you're constantly building on yourself instead of tearing away at yourself. And it's an incredible mindset shift that I've heard dozens of women go through as they've gotten more serious about physical activities. And I say that extremely broadly. So I think your experience is a very poignant one, and it's a very common one for women who go through athletic experiences. And if you were talking to another person, what advice would you have for them, knowing what you've learned from this sport and knowing what it's done for you? How can you translate that over into somebody who, might be able to learn from what you've gleaned from the sport?
So I actually, on my last day of a psychology of gender course, after talking about all of these sort of heavy issues throughout the semester, I try to end on sort of a positive note. So I have everybody bring in something that makes them feel good about, some related to gender. It could mean something that makes them feel proud to be a man or a woman, or something that represents progress to them, et cetera. So to try to end on this positive note. And I always have this sort of debate with myself about what I'm going to tell them about roller derby, because that's when I sort of talk about it in more detail and give some sort of takeaway message from that, I guess. So I tell them about roller derby, and then I say, and the things that it's done for me. And my sort of takeaway message is to find a community. I'm like, I'm happy, if you want to put some skates on, I'll totally hit you. But the message isn't join roller derby. Although if you want to, you totally should. But the message is it's really important to find a community of people that you have something in common with, that are supportive of you and what you're working toward. I would say, again, as someone who researches gender, roller derby has kept me sort of on the front lines about what some of the issues are within that field. And so in addition to being directly applicable to the sorts of things that I teach and, my personal interests, I think it also just helps to have a group of like-minded people. Basically, this is a sport, like I said, that was developed for and by women. I was doing some reflection this summer with the Olympics, right? There was a lot of talk about how women actually brought home more medals than men. And at the same time, I was reflecting on sort of the history of women in sports, and found this image from the 60s of one of the first women trying to run the Boston Marathon. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you might have seen it. The organizer is trying to grab her to prevent her from doing the Boston Marathon. And so it was just this moment that I had that I was like, women were able to succeed in these sports that really were developed for and by men. And it makes you sort of wonder, all right, what would it look like if women developed a sport? And I think to me, that's what sort of roller derby is, and what makes me proud to be a part of it is just like, the women who were fighting to marathon at a time when that was seen as not possible for women. I'm really curious what roller derby will look like in 50 years. And I'm really proud to think that I might have played a part in shaping that.
It's really interesting because I think there is this, one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast, and one of the reasons why I'm seeking out women like yourself who are doing inspirational things that other people might not think to do, it's because there's this interesting phenomenon that happens when people see someone like them in some way do something new that they didn't realize was even possible to do. So I think back to when Casey Catanzaro was able to complete the American Ninja Warrior course for the first time. Mm-hmm. It took so long for that first woman to do it, but as soon as she did and knocked over that first domino, a bunch of women after her were able to complete it. There's something about seeing somebody like you achieve something that plants the seed in your mind that says, I think this might actually be possible. And when you are open to the idea that something might be possible, it's crazy where your mind goes and where your goals just naturally start to set and your behavior starts to crystallize around trying to achieve them. And it's really neat. So, one of the reasons why I want to bring stories like yours out to the people listening to this are that I want to start planting these little seeds that say it is so possible to go out there and find some crazy hobby where you get to knock people over on roller skates or whatever it is you might want to do. And it's possible to completely go and do that and be a novice in the beginning. And as you said, set small goals over time and work towards something new and big and exciting. And I just think this is a great example of that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's something to be said for just using some outlet. Like you said, it could be anything. It could be very personally specific, but having some other outlet in your life besides your career that sometimes gives you a lot of perspective on other things that you do in your life.
Well, Amy, this has been amazing. And I just actually have one last question for you. And it's a question that I ask every single person that I interview for this podcast. I'm compiling a playlist on Spotify that is a set of songs that have been curated by the women who I'm interviewing for the podcast. So at the end of every single podcast, I ask for the person's favorite motivational song. So I'd love to hear yours.
So when we were going to playoffs for the first time, which is the top 40 teams in the world get invited to playoffs, I started looking through my playlist, exactly like you're saying, looking for some motivation. And so the one that spoke to me most when we were at playoffs was Sia Unstoppable.
Nice.
And if you can just picture, she in the chorus, right, she's talking about putting her armor on, showing how powerful and confident she is. And that's exactly mentally what I'm doing, right? When I'm putting on my gear, I'm saying, you know, I've worked for this. I deserve to be here. I, you know, have something to contribute, and I'm going to go show that right now.
I love it. Those are perfect lyrics. That is the perfect way to think about going into something where you just need to be a little bit pumped up, and you need to remember that you absolutely have the skill and you have the preparation and you are absolutely able to be there. I love it.
Yeah. I also like Gavin DeGraw's Fire, and it has, in the video, it has some roller derby as well. So
I'll add 2 to the playlist just because if it's got roller derby in it, we'll have to add a couple on there. That's perfect.
But similarly, I think, talks about some of the themes that we've been talking about. He talks about, you know, being part of a tribe and sort of finding where you fit. And so I think that speaks to me about my experience of roller derby as well.
Well, Amy, I have to say thank you so much for being here today, for being open to sharing your story, and for letting us see behind the curtain of this really interesting sport that not a lot of us know a lot about. So it was wonderful to hear it from your perspective. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with roller derby player extraordinaire, Dr. Maims U. To make the most of what you heard in her interview, head over to www.careerkindling.com and search for Derby to bring up Amy's show notes page. Here you'll find some key takeaways from today's interview, as well as some prompts to help you reflect on what you heard. While you're there, sign up to join our community, and we'll give you immediate access to our Spotify Power playlist, including Amy's songs Unstoppable and Fire. We'd also love to hear from you. Head over to iTunes and leave us a rating or a review, or if you liked what you heard, hit the subscribe button. Finally, I'm on the lookout for the next set of inspiring women to be featured on this podcast. If you know an inspiring woman, or dare I say it, you are an inspiring woman, drop me a note at hello@careerkindling.com. Until next time, have an inspired week.